"Sir, just a piece of bread, please." The words came out of Daniel's mouth with the tone of someone already expecting a no. His voice, hoarse and broken from hunger, was barely heard at first, but the silence that settled in the bakery after that was impossible to ignore. Customers stopped chewing. Cutlery froze mid-air. Even the sound of the coffee machine seemed to disappear for a moment. Mike, the baker, slowly lifted his eyes, dropping the tray of still warm bread on the counter. His fingers were covered in flour, his apron already stained with grease and sweat. The scene was common at that time of morning. Hurried customers, short lines, smell of fresh bread. But that voice, that request, it tore the routine in two. On the other side of the counter, Daniel's look was a mix of fear and hope. Sunken eyes, dirty face, loose and torn t-shirt. The cold Boston morning seemed stuck to his skin. Just another street kid. Another problem at the shop's door. Another reason for customers to complain. A woman in a blue wool coat sitting near the sweets display whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Here we go again. These kids invading again." Daniel's stomach growled again, so loud that the sound filled the space. His cheeks flushed with shame, but he didn't back away. He stood there, still, like someone who knows that if he leaves, he'll spend another whole day with the emptiness screaming inside. Mike kept looking, without saying anything, without showing any reaction, just standing, an invisible war unfolding behind his brown eyes. And now, before I tell you what the baker did, and how this simple decision completely changed this boy's destiny, let me ask you something quickly. If you like real, intense stories that make you truly feel something, subscribe here to the channel. That way you won't miss the next stories I bring every week. Each video is made to move you, make you think, get emotional, and maybe even look at the people around you in a different way. So go ahead and click the subscribe button, because what's about to happen is something that even today, many people at that bakery still remember. Mike took a deep breath. The weight of the decision was there, stuck between his chest and throat. For a second, he looked at the other customers as if seeking some kind of approval. He didn't find it. He only saw cold, judging looks, wanting him to say what was always said at times like this, "Go away." But something inside him, something even he didn't know where it came from, started to burn. His fingers tapped lightly on the counter, an involuntary gesture as if the body was deciding before the mind. He walked to the door, locked it with the key, turned to the boy, and with a firm voice but without raising the tone, said, "Come with me." And at that moment, Daniel's world started to change. Daniel's heart almost stopped. For a second, he thought he was going to be taken outside, kicked out like so many other times. But Mike's tone of voice was different. There was no shouting, no threat. It was firm, but with something the boy hadn't recognized in a long time. A strange kind of care. Without really understanding, Daniel obeyed. He followed the baker, with small, hesitant steps, crossing the bakery floor. He felt the stairs burning on his back, like each person there was marking the moment he crossed the invisible line between customer and unwanted. A man in a tie muttered, "Now it's going to turn into a shelter." Another commented softly, "It's always like this. You give a hand and they want the whole arm." Mike ignored them. He pushed the kitchen door with his shoulder and signaled for Daniel to come in. The smell was even stronger inside, a mix of baked bread, yeast, and coffee. There were flour sacks piled up, trays everywhere, ovens on. Daniel took a deep breath as if that air was denser, warmer, more alive than anywhere he had been in the past months. Without wasting time, Mike grabbed a cloth towel and filled a basin with warm water. "Wash your hands first," he said, extending the container. Daniel looked confused. It had been days since he'd seen clean water, let alone warm water. His hands trembled so much he almost dropped the basin. But he scrubbed hard, as if trying to remove not just the dirt, but also everything he'd been carrying from the streets. Meanwhile, Mike prepared a plate. 2 still warm pieces of bread, a generous slice of cake, and a glass of milk. He put it all on a little table in the corner, away from the kitchen rush, but still close enough not to leave the boy alone. "Eat. No rush," he said, going back to work as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Daniel sat down, barely believing it was real. His hands still trembled as he picked up the first piece of bread. He bit hard, as if the world could end at any second, and that was the last meal of his life. The tears came without warning. They fell, mixed with crumbs and milk. On the other side of the kitchen, Mike kept kneading the dough with strong movements, but he didn't stop throwing discreet glances at the boy. Every time Daniel took another bite, the baker took a deep breath as if relieved by something even he couldn't explain. The minutes passed slowly. The food disappeared from the plate. When Daniel finished, he wiped his lips with his shirt sleeve, lowered his head and murmured, "Thank you, sir." Mike stopped what he was doing, wiped his hands on the apron and came closer. He spent a few seconds just looking at the boy, like someone trying to decipher an ancient puzzle. "How old are you?" he asked in a low voice. 11, I think," Daniel answered without raising his eyes. "You think?" Daniel shrugged. "I'm not sure. Lost count." That answer hit like a punch in Mike's chest. The baker closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, then asked, "And your parents?" The silence that followed was different from all the others. A heavy, hard silence, full of everything Daniel hadn't yet learned to put into words. After a few seconds, he just answered, "I don't know." Mike nodded as if he had understood everything without needing further explanations. Outside, the bakery doorbell rang again. More customers arriving. More people in a hurry, wanting coffee and bread. And none of them had any idea about the small, silent revolution happening behind the counter. Mike went back to work, but before walking away completely, he said without looking back, "When you finish resting, give me a hand around here. You can start by sweeping this floor." And that was it. No life lesson speech. No promise of a better future. Just an opportunity. Small, but for Daniel, at that moment, it felt like the whole world. The broom seemed enormous in Daniel's small hands. The wooden handle was rough, full of splinters, but he didn't complain. He swept with force, trying to push away along with the dust that old fear that, at any moment, someone would yell at him, kick him out, or worse, accuse him of stealing, like had already happened before in other places. Mike watched from a distance, pretending to be focused on the batches coming out of the oven, but paying attention to every move the boy made. He saw when Daniel stumbled twice, almost knocking over a pile of cardboard boxes. He saw when he struggled to drag the water bucket with trembling hands. But the boy didn't stop, didn't complain, didn't ask for help. After almost an hour of work, his forehead was shining with sweat. His still fragile hands were red from scrubbing the floor with the wet cloth. But his eyes had changed. They were more alive, with that strange glow of someone who, for the first time in a long time, feels like they matter. Mike put down the bread he was shaping and came closer. "That's enough for today," he said, tossing a dish towel in his direction. Daniel caught the towel mid-air like a goalkeeper defending the last shot of an imaginary championship final. "Dry your hands and sit over there. I'll bring you something else to eat." This time the boy smiled. Small, shy, but a real smile. While eating the second piece of bread, with some butter this time, Daniel told a bit more about his life. He said he slept in an alley 2 blocks away, near a hardware store. That he made a few coins collecting cans or helping carry groceries when someone had enough pity to give him $1. He said that sometimes he got a meal at a community center, but that most days it was just water from the park fountain and waiting for the hunger to pass. Mike listened in silence, just nodding from time to time. He didn't ask invasive questions, didn't show pity, just listened, as if that simple act of attentive listening was already, in itself, a kind of shelter. That day, when it was time to close the bakery, Mike opened the cash drawer, took out some coins, and handed them to Daniel. "Buy yourself something at the market, and tomorrow, if you want, come back early. There's more floor to sweep." Daniel held the coins as if they were gold, clenched them tightly inside his pants pocket, like someone who knows the world can change its mind at any moment and take everything away. When the boy walked out the front door, the sky was already turning orange with that sunset tone that mixes hope with farewell. Mike stood at the door, watching the boy walk away down the sidewalk. For a moment, he almost called him back, but he held back. He went back inside, turned off the kitchen lights, and before turning the key in the door, looked one last time at the street. The park bench, the trees swaying in the wind, and the corner of the street where Daniel used to sleep. That night, while arranging the bread for the next day, Mike realized he was thinking about the boy more often than he'd like to admit. What he didn't know is that this would be the first of many nights he'd lose sleep because of that boy. The next day, even before the sun rose, Daniel was already at the bakery door, sitting on the sidewalk with his legs curled up and his eyes fixed on the window, like someone afraid that if he blinked, the world would change its mind and the opportunity would disappear. Mike arrived minutes later, as he always did, with the same firm stride of every morning. He carried the key in his right pocket and the tired look of someone who had slept less than he needed. Seeing the boy there, standing, waiting, the baker took a deep breath and simply said, "Good morning. Let's work?" Daniel nodded with a small smile and followed him inside. Neither of them said anything else, but that simple, "Good morning," was enough to make the boy's heart race. The routine started like the day before. He swept the floor, arranged the chairs, cleaned the tables, then helped Mike carry flour sacks to the back of the bakery. His still weak arms trembled with the weight, but he refused to give up. Once or twice he dropped something on the floor, mumbled an apology. Mike just replied, "Get up and try again." At coffee time, Mike placed a glass of chocolate milk on the counter, and this time Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed it and drank eagerly. While taking the last sip, the baker placed a brown paper bag next to him. "There's an old sweater of mine inside. It's cold out there. Take it for yourself." Daniel didn't know what to say. He looked at the package like it was a Christmas present. His hands trembled as he held the bag. He could only murmur a nearly inaudible, "Thank you." The following days followed almost the same rhythm. Every morning, Daniel arrived before the door opened. Swept, cleaned, carried boxes. Always got something to eat. Always received a silent, approving glance from Mike. Little by little, he got used to the noise of the machines, the smell of yeast, the sound of the doorbell ringing every time a customer entered. But not everyone was happy with his presence. Some older customers started making comments. A lady, a client for years, even said out loud while paying for her coffee, "Mike, soon this boy will want to sleep in here." Mike just smiled slightly, with that way of his of ignoring provocations, and replied, "If he wants to, there's space behind the oven. It's warm." The woman grimaced and left huffing. Daniel, hearing that, felt a mix of shame and happiness. Shame for the stares, the whispers. Happiness for knowing that somehow the baker was on his side. One afternoon, while they carried a new shipment of flour sacks, Mike asked about school. Daniel fell silent. His gaze dropped instantly. After a few seconds, he replied in a thin voice, "I quit a long time ago. No one asks me about that." Mike nodded, said nothing at that moment, but that answer kept echoing in his head the rest of the day. That night, after closing the bakery, Mike went online, searched for hours, called 2 community centers, and wrote down addresses on a crumpled piece of paper. The next day, when Daniel arrived, the routine was the same until late morning. After the bakery rush died down, Mike called the boy aside, handed him the folded paper. "There's a school nearby that accepts students like you. They have a special program. No cost. If you want, I'll take you there tomorrow." Daniel froze, looked at the paper, then at the baker, then at the paper again. "No one ever asked me if I wanted to go back to school," he said, voice cracking. Mike gave him a light pat on the back. "Well, I'm asking now." The boy nodded, not trusting his own voice. He just nodded his head. In that instant, something inside him began to change. A timid but real hope. Like, after so long, life had finally opened a door he didn't know existed. And deep down, without saying it out loud, Daniel knew that door had the shape of a bakery and the smell of fresh bread. The next morning, Daniel arrived even earlier. The cold was biting, but he didn't care. He wore the old sweater Mike had given him, with the sleeves rolled up to fit his small arms. His hair, once messy, was now less tangled. He had washed it at the park fountain the night before, scrubbing hard as if trying to erase the marks of the street. Mike appeared around the corner carrying 2 bags of bread for the neighbors, and when he saw the boy there waiting, he just gave a half smile. Didn't say anything, just nodded his head like saying, "Well, let's get started." After finishing the morning chores, Mike turned off the ovens and closed the front door earlier than usual. He grabbed the keys, looked at Daniel and said, "Today we have an appointment." The walk to the community school was done in silence. Daniel walked with small steps, but his heart was beating like a drum inside his chest. At every corner he looked back, as if expecting someone to appear to take him away, yell at him, or send him back to the street. But no one came. When they reached the school gate, Mike placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I think it'll be good for you." Daniel took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and nodded. This was bigger than him, bigger than any decision he had ever made. The principal, a gray-haired lady named Mrs. Carter, welcomed them with a gentle smile. She talked with Mike for a few minutes while Daniel, sitting on a wooden bench, watched other kids running around the yard, with colorful backpacks on their backs and books in their hands. A world so distant from his reality that it seemed fake. After filling out some papers, Mrs. Carter crouched in front of him and said, "Daniel, we're going to start slow, okay? You can come just 3 times a week at first. Here, no one will force you to do anything. The important thing is that you feel good." He just nodded, still not believing this was real. On the way back to the bakery, Mike stopped at a school supplies store and bought a simple notebook and a pencil. When he handed them to the boy, Daniel held the objects like they were trophies, gripped them so tightly that his fingers turned white. The following days were a mix of routine and discovery. In the morning, Daniel worked at the bakery, swept, cleaned, helped pack the bread. In the afternoon, he went to school. At first, shy, he spoke little, but little by little he opened up, discovered he liked math, that he was good at reading, that he was good at helping classmates. Mike, for his part, continued watching everything from a distance, with that quiet and straightforward way of his. But every time Daniel came back from school with a different smile, or showed a filled-out exercise sheet with pride, the baker felt something inside him that made his chest ache, in a good way. One Saturday morning when the bakery was quieter, Daniel showed up with a sheet of paper in his hand. It was the first text he had written on his own at school. The title, written in big, crooked letters, was, "The Best Thing That Happened to Me." Mike read in silence. Every line felt like a punch to the stomach. The boy talked about hunger, fear, cold, and then about the smell of bread, warmth, and someone who had reached out when no one else did. Unable to say anything, Mike just ran his hand over the boy's head and went back to the counter, swallowing hard. But what neither of them knew was that this was just the beginning of a friendship that would go far beyond the bakery, far beyond the street, far beyond what anyone there could imagine. Winter arrived earlier that year. The mornings were colder, the wind sharper, and the sky always seemed to wake up gray. Even so, Daniel remained strong, arrived before sunrise, swept the sidewalk with his hands stuffed in his pockets, the beanie Mike had given him pulled down over his eyes. The bakery changed too. Customers started to notice. Some who had complained before about the boy's presence now greeted him with a nod. Others even dared a discreet smile. There was even a lady, the same one who months earlier had made that snide comment about the shelter, who started leaving small tip coins on the counter with a note that read, "For the most dedicated helper on Jefferson Street." But not everything was easy. One afternoon near the end of the day, while Daniel was cleaning the sweets display, 3 older boys walked in, all from the street. Daniel knew their faces, knew what they did when they didn't have money, took what they could and ran. His heart raced. Mike was in the back, carrying a sack of flour. The 3 started walking around the bakery like they owned the place. One of them, the biggest, named Tony, approached Daniel and whispered, "So this is where you've been hiding, huh? Playing the employee? How cute." Daniel froze. He knew that answering back meant trouble, but staying silent was like accepting the humiliation. The second boy grabbed 2 loaves of bread from the basket and stuffed them inside his coat. The third knocked over a jar of cookies onto the floor, just to provoke. Before Daniel could react, Mike appeared in the kitchen doorway. Didn't yell, didn't run, just walked up to the 3 of them with that calm and dangerous manner of someone who doesn't need to raise their voice to be taken seriously. "Leave that, and get out," he said firmly. The boys hesitated. Tony tried to act tough, took a step forward, but one cold, steady look from Mike was enough for him to change his mind. Without saying a word, the 3 left, slamming the door hard. Daniel stayed still, hands trembling. Mike approached slowly. "Are you okay?" The boy just nodded, but inside, the fear was still rushing through his veins. That night, Mike locked the front door more tightly than usual. After double-checking, he pulled out a chair and called Daniel to sit. "Listen, there's something you need to understand." He started, scratching his head, searching for the right words. "In here, as long as I'm around, no one lays a finger on you. Got it?" Daniel's eyes widened. That promise, that simple sentence, was more powerful than anything else he had ever heard in his life. The boy lowered his head, but the smile escaped before he could hide it. From that day on, Daniel began walking with his head held higher, started helping not only with the basic chores but also with the baking. Mike taught him how to roll croissants, how to sort the loaves, how to feel the dough's point just by touch. The mornings took on a new rhythm. The boy at the counter, hands covered in flour, laughing when he messed up the shape of the bread, and Mike correcting, patiently, like someone who knows that teaching is more than showing the way. It's walking it together. But fate, that ironic master, still had one last trial in store. One night, very late, when Daniel was returning to the alley where he still slept, he found the same 3 boys waiting for him, this time with closed faces, low and threatening voices. "You think you're somebody now, huh? Working with the baker, trying to act all proper?" said Tony, shoving Daniel against the cold brick wall. The boy tried to fight back, but it was no use. The punches came fast, along with the kicks and insults. The world spun, and before he could scream, everything went dark. Hours later, with a bruised face and aching body, Daniel appeared at the bakery door, blood running from his eyebrow, his t-shirt torn, his knee scraped. Mike opened the door and, seeing the boy's state, froze for a second, but quickly pulled him inside, locked the door behind him, and began cleaning the wounds with all the care he could manage, even with hands trembling with rage. While wiping Daniel's face with a damp cloth, the baker whispered softly, almost like a promise, "They'll never touch you again. Never again." In that moment, through tears and pain, Daniel understood something he had never truly felt before. There, in that place, he had someone who cared. The following days were a mix of recovery and silence. Daniel showed up at the bakery every day, even with his face still swollen, lips cut, and body aching. Mike, as always, didn't ask too many questions. He just placed the food on the table, pointed at the broom, or called the boy to help at the counter. His way of caring was practical, direct, but full of meaning. But inside, Mike was restless. His nights of sleep grew shorter. Between one batch and another, he was making a plan. He wasn't going to leave that boy at the mercy of new attacks. He wouldn't wait until it was too late. On a Wednesday afternoon, with the bakery closed for maintenance, Mike called Daniel for a more serious conversation. "Listen, there's something I've been meaning to ask you for a while. Have you ever thought about having a real place to sleep? A real bed, you know? Your own room?" Daniel froze. Didn't answer. Just stared at the floor, as if the words were traps, as if he was afraid to believe this could be real. Mike continued, "There's a spare room at my house. It's not big, but there's a bed, a blanket, and it's warm. If you want, you can stay there until, I don't know, until whenever you want." The silence lasted long seconds, until Daniel, with a trembling voice, asked, "Why? Why are you doing all this for me?" Mike took a deep breath, wiped his hands on the apron, looked at the boy firmly, and answered, "Because years ago, I also needed someone to do this for me, and there was no one." Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. The tears came like an avalanche. He couldn't hold them back. He cried right there in the middle of the kitchen with his hands covering his face, while Mike just stood by his side, in silence, waiting for the tears to pass. That night, for the first time in a long time, Daniel slept in a real bed. The mattress was hard, the sheets smelled of cheap laundry soap, but to him it felt like a luxury hotel. Before falling asleep, he stared at the ceiling, with a tired smile on his face and a light heart. The following months brought changes no one expected. Daniel started filling out, getting stronger, faster. His grades at school began to improve. He made friends, started understanding math in a way that even the teachers were impressed. At the bakery, he became practically Mike's right hand, knew how to handle the doughs, turn on the ovens, take care of the display. The customers, once suspicious, now made a point of asking for him when they arrived. Some even left notes of encouragement, little folded messages inside bread bags. At the end of that winter, something happened that symbolized the definitive turning point. The same lady who, months before, had criticized Daniel's presence entered the bakery with a somewhat awkward expression. She approached the counter and, with a hesitant smile, said, "Can the young man prepare 2 bags of bread for me? He does it better than you, Mike." Daniel heard it, smiled shyly, but inside his heart exploded with pride. At the end of the day, Mike called the boy for one last message. You know you're part of this now, right? Not just a helper, not just a street kid. You're part of the team. And more than that, your family. Daniel didn't answer right away. He just went to the bread shelf, picked one, broke it in half, and handed one piece to Mike. Sharing, that's how it all started, right? He said with a smile. They both laughed. The silence that followed was light, comfortable, a silence of people who didn't need many words to understand what really mattered. Outside, night was already falling over the city. The lights of Jefferson Street reflected in the puddles from the last rain. People passed by in a hurry, each with their own story, their problems, their pain. But inside, in that corner bakery, warmed by the smell of fresh bread, a life had changed forever, and maybe more than one. And you? What would you do in the baker's place? Would you have the same attitude? Tell me here in the comments. I really want to know your opinion about this story.